disperse for lunch, and we will see you back for the fourth session at 2 p.m. sharp. Our third session for the day is Strategic Connectivity Projects in Geopolitics of West Asia and Central Asia, BRI, IMEC, and INSTC. I would request our session chair, Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, to please formally introduce the panelists. Ambassador Dinkar Srivastava, Mr. Karn Kedar, Lieutenant General Raj Shukla, Mr. Ohad N. Kaynar, who is Israel's Deputy Chief of Mission to India, and Ambassador Mehmet Hassan Gobus. Panelists, would you please make your way to the stage? And you're requested to limit your response to 10 minutes maximum. Thank you.
It was extremely difficult to listen to somebody, especially after lunch. The French are the best, they have a siesta time, but there is none here. But it's a very, very important topic that we are talking about in this session. And we have a brilliant lineup of speakers today. You all know that connectivity is critical for commerce, for culture, and dissemination of the civilizational heritage and interaction. India has always been a trading nation, a maritime power, and has connected through West Asia to Europe, to other countries in different parts of the world. It was mentioned earlier panel by Professor Mahapatra about the historic connect to Central Asia. There were empires, Indian empires, which went as far back in both Central Asia and operated very benevolently there. That is the most important part of it. But in recent times, these connectivity projects have also become, or have rather acquired, a more strategic character. We have seen that happening with Belt and Road Initiative, which was launched in 2013 by President Xi Jinping. And it has just recently celebrated its 10 years. People might criticize the BRI, but it has provided a certain kind of a format, a comprehensive format, an effort to help create a new world order through connectivity. Large number of countries, from Asia to Africa to Latin America to Europe, were part of it or have been part of it or become a part of it. Many have gained, several have lost. The Chinese are rethinking, exactly because it was an ambitious project. And as Dr. Anil in the morning was saying about India's project, Bharat Corridor or IMEC as it is called now, is something that does worry them. Even though, in my view, we don't look at it as something counter to China. For us, it is a natural connectivity. Natural connectivity because we are connected. We have been doing this for all along. It's not for the first time that we are doing it. But let's go back a little bit to 2000. And in 2000, and I was in Moscow at the time, we did agree for this famous International North-South Transport Corridor project. It's more than 23 years now. Russia, India, Iran, and now 10 more countries, including Armenia, are part of it. If we start looking at connectivity as a zero-sum game, then we are going to have problems. But connectivity for whom and for what? The purpose of the connectivity should be beneficial to the member states, either as a rent for bypassing or benefiting from the development that takes place along the corridor, or it provides a friendly relations to develop along the corridor. That is besides, that's the main purpose of the corridor. And when it is required in the final analysis, then you see that it can be used even to ensure your security. Because certain dependencies occur. Not the kind that we have seen in the BRI. There are debt burdens that have increased tremendously on several countries. So, INSTC started off early, about, let's say, 7 years before the BRI. But it has lagged for various reasons, as we know. And Ambassador Srivastava will talk about it in greater detail. But the role of Chabahar Port now has become far more significant. There were sanctions, secondary sanctions by the United States that impacted our relationship with Iran to a great extent. But this Chabahar Port still remained outside the purview of the sanctions. Yet many companies did not exploit the fullest potential, because sanctions can hit you anywhere, because the way the system operates, we see it with its functionality. And therefore many companies don't take chances to do that. Things went slow. The government of India continued its engagement. Iranians do understand, Afghans do understand. And then you have the Afghanistan issue, which has also impacted to a great extent on this. But very recently, some very important initiatives have occurred to salvage this issue. That is that our External Affairs Minister was there, had meetings, and I understand that we have approved a line of credit of $250 million for Chabahar itself. The more interesting dimension of it is that even the Taliban, and I don't see the many projects they are getting into, but they have also opened investments into this project from their side for about $25 million that they have announced, which is something to watch for because of their dynamic currently going on between Afghanistan and Pakistan. So we need to understand that when we come to IMEC, and immediately some red lines are drawn by certain countries, it is not that India is looking for several options. We are talking of many corridors. It is not, the IMEC is one corridor which will happen. India is serious about it. We signed a framework agreement with UAE only when Prime Minister Modi was there on 13th of February. Greek Prime Minister was here, and again the discussions were held. But during this time, and I am sure our friend DCM from Israeli Embassy will speak about it, that during this time when the Israel-Hamas war happened, there was a lot of debate and discussion that what will happen to IMEC. One thing I can assure you is that from India's point of view, Middle East, West Asia are extremely important for us. And that, Dr. Nani, I would like to just also say that the relationship, if I were to personally say, in the last 10 years, our relations with West Asia, and more importantly with Gulf states, have turned truly strategic, irrespective of the local fault lines and the conflicts that are happening there. So that is very important to understand, because it is an existential partnership. You also brought out, and it's a fact for us. So stability and security in Middle East and West Asia is of great concern to India. So connectivity project, as far as UAE is concerned, it's already our third largest trading partner. Saudi Arabia is the fourth largest trading partner. So it's natural that we work together in these lines. Israel is our strategic partner. It's a Haifa port, Indian company is operating it now, part of it. Piraeus port in Greece makes a natural progression. Also within the evolving geopolitics that is happening to reach out to all the seas. And India is a resident Indian Ocean power. So maritime connectivity is also equally important for us. It will also provide a lot of opportunities. So we, from our part, we are doing whatever is required to be done, because these projects take a decade or so minimum. At the same time, we need to see what is happening within the Gulf. Gulf itself is trying its own railway project, connecting even to Jordan. There are many other projects that are going on that will eventually plug in. So I will not take much time now, but I only want to say that India today wants to be a part of the global and value supply chains. It wants to provide to the world that alternative, and it has the capacity to do so. And it is in that context that these connectivity corridors, whether it is IMEC, whether it is INSTC, whether it is our Eastern Corridor, or the Chennai-Vladivostok, the new one which is coming up with Russia to the Arctic, or any other for that matter, are very important. So IMEC, in my view personally, should be looked at one more alternative. At the end of the day, the corridor's purpose is to transport things, and they should be more effective and efficient. Each one is talking about reducing. BRI has reduced the transit time by 30 days, cost by 30-40%. Very similar terms of reference are being offered on the other tracks also. So it will depend eventually on the businesses, how much they are going to utilize. We have seen the INSTC has not been that much used, but it has acquired a much greater heft during the Russia-Ukraine war and otherwise. And you'll be surprised that now with the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea, this middle corridor, as we talk about, is also becoming far more consequential. The Russians rail lines, despite sanctions and everything, the Russian networks are being used by the Western companies a great deal. So that is another change. I'm sure some of our colleagues will. Let me just now introduce our panelists. Ambassador Dinkar Srivastava, my senior colleague, and he is a distinguished fellow at the Vivekanand International Foundation. And he was also the Indian ambassador to the Islamic Republic of Iran at a very critical juncture when he led the Indian negotiations basically on Chabahar port, and is truly credited for that. He has also served as India's ambassador to Czech Republic, Libya, and India's High Commissioner to Malta. These two stations we have a common pedigree for. He also is a director in several esteemed organizations like basically related to oil and gas, GAIL, Gas Authority of India Limited, ONGC Videsh, Indian Ports Global, which is the one operating the Shahid Bishti port there. And he has a tremendous experience in oil diplomacy. His interests lie in enabling and opening new markets in the energy, port, urea, petrochemical sectors, and other infrastructure development. He has also authored the book Forgotten Kashmir, The Other Side of the Line of Control, published by HarperCollins. Then we have Mr. Karn Kedar. He is presently holding the position of an assistant manager of global relations at Adani Enterprises Limited. And most of you know that Adani is specialized in ports and including in Haifa. So Mr. Kedar is deeply interested in the energy sector. He has also served as the Associate Manager of Energy Strategy at Adani Enterprises Limited and completed his second Master's in Global Energy Transition and Governance from Centre International de Formation Européenne after having done his Master's in Energy Management Systems. So he is again an energy expert, and we should see how the ports and energy are going to do, because these are data and so many other things in that. And then we have a very distinguished general with us, Lieutenant General Raj Shukla, who has recently been appointed as a member of the Union Public Service Commission, which recruits all the top civil servants. Lieutenant General Shukla is a retired Army commander who has an enviable operational service record spanning 43 years. He also has an abiding interest in strategic military affairs, hence authored close to 50 articles and lectured as well as participated. Thinking general truly, indeed. And he'll of course be talking on a very different subject in the middle, just to give us, that will be the Bharat, the natural security dimension, which is a continuation of yesterday's. And then we have my friend, Mr. Ohad Kaynar is, of course, the Minister Plenipotentiary and the Deputy Chief of Mission of the Embassy of Israel in New Delhi. And he has been here for quite some time and is very well known, and the Okay, that's well. He's one of the most popular persons, and we listen from him a good commentary about exactly what's going on this IMEC project as far as Israel's normalization and other dimensions are concerned, and how it is perceived from Tel Aviv essentially. And then we have Ambassador Mehmet Gobus, whom you have heard yesterday and again in the interventions, and he has been Turkey's ambassador to India at one time, currently engaged with some think tanks. So without spending more time, I'd like to request Ambassador Srivastava to start.
Well, Anil, thanks for a very generous introduction. When we talk of connectivity, we have to bear in mind that though diplomats and generals like to talk about geopolitics and strategy, I think what gives substance is the business, and that requires us to depoliticize the issue. And the second observation I would like to make before I start my presentation is that it's not simply the route, it is the trade volumes and the direction which decide which route the trade will take. And I'm making this clarification because we'll come to that a little later. Now, INSTC, India International North-South, I call it Transit Corridor. I think the original name is Transport Corridor. I call it transit because it's not simply transport to one country. The route goes through several countries. And I had the privilege of being associated with both Chabahar and INSTC project as Indian ambassador to Iran. During my term, I had the privilege of negotiating Indian participation in Chabahar port agreement. And also, we organized the first trial shipment along INSTC. Now, this map which you see here, it shows the distance between Kandla port and Mumbai port with Chabahar. Now, to explain it in simple terms, Kandla to Chabahar or Mumbai to Chabahar is a day and 1.5 days voyage. If you have a choice, you can also go to Bandar Abbas, which is closer to Hormuz. That doubles the sailing time. Bandar Abbas has other advantages. Its hinterland connectivity is better. Chabahar is still a work in progress. But what has to be kept in mind that Chabahar to Kandla or Chabahar to Mumbai is shorter distance than Mumbai to Cochin or Kandla to Cochin. So it tells you the proximity and the advantage of using this route. Now, the success of port operation, it depends on three things: port itself, a shipping line, and hinterland connectivity. I tried to work on all three. And incidentally, post-retirement, our government was kind enough to put me on the board of directors of India Ports Global, where I served for 6 years. There are still, apart from the port operations, which have not taken off as well as I would have imagined. And the reason I would not put it on sanctions because, as Anil was mentioning, the US has given a specific sanction for operation of Chabahar port. So it's really an exaggerated perception of risk which has kept the business from making fuller use of Chabahar port. The real problems with Chabahar, as I see, having dealt with it for more than a decade now in different capacities, there is no regular shipping line. And that again goes back to the same exaggerated fear of sanctions. And the hinterland connectivity, there was an initial discussion about a railway line connecting. That has not happened. But I have traveled very extensively in this region, right from Chabahar up to Zaidan, which is midway. Unfortunately, the map doesn't show, right up to Mashhad, which is on Turkmenistan border. And what amazed me, these roads are built to American specifications. So 6-lane highway, as good as any American highway that you see, or perhaps better. So road connectivity is already it already exists. Next. Now this map, you see these arrows, and they start from Bandar Abbas, which is down below, which you can't see from where you are sitting. Bandar Abbas is on the mouth of Hormuz, and this is an older port. It takes its name from Shah Abbas, and of course the Iranians and Abbas dynasty, they were not much of mariners. They were land power, this is how Hormuz got established. The Portuguese established a fortification right at the mouth of Bandar Abbas. Basically, it was, kind of embargo. Now, Bandar Abbas is very well connected to locations up north, which this map shows. And let me clarify, there's a misperception. I keep hearing this again and again and again, and I sometimes get irritated. That the problem, and this was also part of my brief from the ministry, that the problem is there's a gap on Rasht Astara. This is the westernmost arrow which you see. Rasht Astara is a port on Caspian's western fringe. So the argument goes that because there is no rail link, there's an 80 kilometers gap here, that's why this INSTC has not taken on. Now let me clarify, Bandar Abbas is already connected by rail to at least 3 points up north. Now let's start with Sarax, which is the easternmost point, and this is at the tri-junction of Afghanistan, Turkmenistan and Iran. I've been to Sarax, and Sarax is connected to Bandar Abbas by rail as well as road. And across Sarax, you have Turkmenistan border. There is already an existing railway. There's a difference, that is the railways in the Central Asian republics, they follow the old Soviet gauge. So interoperability is a problem you have to change, but the connectivity exists. The second one is Inche-Barun. You move little to the west, and Inche-Barun is a crossing on Iran-Turkmenistan border. This was inaugurated jointly by presidents of Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan and Iran in 2014. I had the privilege of being invited. And Inche-Barun again is connected to Bandar Abbas by rail. The third point is Ahmedabad. This is a port on Caspian seashore, a little west of Inche-Barun. And this also is connected to Bandar Abbas by railway line. And Inche-Barun Ahmedabad port has been developed with Kazakh assistance, and Kazakhstan's interest was to use this port for their wheat exports. And in fact, they have built silos in Ahmedabad for storing wheat for export purposes. Then you go further west, and you have Bandar Anzali, which is not clear from this map, which is a traditional port, smaller. You go further, extreme west, you have Astara port. And Astara port, I've been to all these locations. Astara port, this is connected to Bandar Abbas by road. There is a gap on the rail network. And from Astara, you can go up north through Azerbaijan by road, or you can ship goods through Caspian Sea to Astrakhan, which is a Russian port which you see on top. So connectivity already exists, infrastructure exists. It is the awareness which is lacking. And of course, there is this, as I mentioned, exaggerated perception of risk, because transit trade never was or is subject to sanctions. And what I found out during my stint as Indian ambassador to Iran, two countries which made most use of transit facility, not necessarily along INSTC, but through Iran. It's, Iran is the issue in terms of sanctions. Two countries which made most use of the transit through Iran were Japan and UAE, and both were part of American military alliance. So if Japan and UAE have no problems using, transit through Iran, what is the problem for Indian businessmen or Indian banks? Indian banks, they hesitate in opening LC without which no trade is possible. Next slide. Now this shows the map of INSTC, and there are three main branches. One goes eastward through Central Asian republics. The middle one goes northwards to Moscow and St. Petersburg, and the western one can go from Tehran through Armenia on to Georgia and Turkey and so on. Now, the northwards, which is the Moscow, St. Petersburg, once you have crossed over to Astrakhan, which is a port on Russian side of the Caspian Sea, there is a railway line connecting it right up to Moscow and St. Petersburg. So again, the infrastructure exists. This is not like Brie where something was to be or is being developed. And this is supposed to, this will reduce the cost by 30% and time by 40%. Now, let me mention that for your eastward traffic to the Central Asian republics, the advantage of INSTC is much more than this north or the western trade, because Central Asian republics, some of them like Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan, are double landlocked, and the current approach from India, I have 5 minutes. Current approach from India, you have to go all the way eastward to China, and then from China maybe use Brie to reach here. Then the westward route, next slide. This is through Armenia, and there is Megri on Iran-Armenia border, and there is this route which is shown here in white and yellow. This is a road which travels right up to Georgia, and this will provide very good access to westward. And of course, you can either go north to Russia, or you can go across the Black Sea to Turkey and so on. Next. Some of the advantages: costs are reduced, expanded market access, development of regional hubs, and so on. Next. Now, some of the trade figures. Now, what I'll try to point out. Keep changing. Next one. Next. Leave. Stay. No. Go. Okay, just stay here. That India's share in Central Asian exports, global exports. Central Asia has a global import basket. This can improve dramatically if INSTC takes off, and conversely, this will also improve options or access of Central Asian republics to outside world. Now, you look at the last row, that India's share in Central Asian republics global exports is just 2.76, slightly more, but still less than 3%. And this is something in which Central Asian republics will be interested in improving their share. Next. Now, India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. Can you move to the next one? Let me show the map. Now, here it's a historical, it's irony that what is considered new actually existed. It was simply that we lost track of. Now, this IMEC has two parts. The first one, the Eastern Corridor, which is from India to Jebel Ali, that already exists. Almost all Indian ports and almost all shipping lines, they go to Jebel Ali. Now, It's the northern track, which is from Saudi Arabia through Israel, which needs a bit of development. And this is what I was saying, that historically, there was used to be a trade route from Yemen. Frankincense used to travel through Hijaz region, Medina, and on to Haifa and so on, which is now part of Israel. And of course, India has had a presence. Indian troops liberated Haifa in First World War. So this is right now there's a pause, but I hope it will simply be a pause, not a full stop. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Firstly, I would like to thank Dr. Abhinav for giving me this opportunity and just sharing the stage with these fine gentlemen and accomplished dignitaries makes me feel humbled, honored, and privileged all at the same time. First of all, after a really informative and extensive session, I think I'll keep it light, maybe keep it from a bird eye view. And from the perspective of how a company, I belong to the Adani group, how a company usually goes about it in the vaguest of manner, we won't go into the details. So I'll begin with a quote from a French economist from the 1800s. He said, "If goods don't cross borders, armies will." Now, the relevance of that today is, you can always interpret what do you mean by goods traveling exactly. Would it just be services? Would it be some kind of economic entry into the country? But at the same time, it highlights the fact that friendship is forged through trade, exchange of goods, not necessarily need-based, but for the sake of keeping the friendship, keeping a connection alive, keeping a reach, as was discussed yesterday. It's not about how close you are, but how easily you can reach, right? Now, another point that was discussed yesterday, that history ended with the end of the Soviet, right? That's what was said yesterday, and I kind of agree, because after that we can say that the world shifted from geographic strength and geographic spread, countries trying to show their power geographically, to economic, right? And that is around the time when the concepts of these corridors, like by the name that they come right now, INSTC and maybe later on BRI, it was about economic, right? China trying to engage all these countries, create a trade route and establish its economic dominance. And this is the point I'll try to focus on in terms of how the companies who have tried to make use of this economic spread. So we come to the basic concept which everyone knows, the supply chain issues, right? Nowadays the development, first there was the fuel in the Middle East, now the critical minerals are with China, so supply chain becomes a major issue. At the same time, businesses are highly vulnerable to supply chain, so there are a few options that, like very basic, obvious options. First, find either alternate sources or maintain relations with the one guy who has it. But again, the alternate sources is not always the best option, because for companies it's more of a margin-based competition, so we cannot always go for the the long-term mitigation of risk kind of an option. We have to deliver to our shareholders on a cost-competitive basis, so we have to make the choices in the short run. At the same time, the other point that came up, which was mentioned by Anil sir also, the global value chain. It was not just the supply of the raw materials, but also getting things partially made in one area of the world, partially made in other area of the world, and maybe assemble it to a third place. Now this made sense because it reduced the cost of maybe infrastructure as well as the learning curve. If a country is good at something, get it done from them. We don't need to bring it here. But in the recent times, the geopolitics, in the past 5-6 years is my understanding of this. At least the our company level conversations usually say that it's time that we are being forced to choose reshoring rather than offshoring. Right? So now we are bringing things back. We are trying to build the infrastructure where we are, so we are less susceptible to the global geopolitics of it. So now this takes away a lot of advantage that a company has. We have to put in a lot of money, a lot of time to raise the infrastructure. So here, the government policies, the government attempts at friendship are what help us navigate. Of course, there are the free trade agreements that have been coming up, and India has been wonderfully playing the game of ensuring that as strategic partners we have a free trade agreement, we have other tax, not tax, the tariff-based tools that we use to make sure that we have those relations. That brings us to the connectivity part. Okay, so we got a free trade agreement. We are sure that XYZ country is going to supply us this. But then, what about the countries in between? We need a strategic connectivity, as was explained here. The routes existed, but they have their own set of risks, like the Chabahar port we discussed. It was an idea, it made obvious sense. But the geopolitics of it stopped, right? So these strategic connectivity projects are key for any business to make business decisions, because they also provide the security part of it, that okay, this has been signed, and considering the global value chain, it's about us putting in assets in the other country. So security of those assets are a major concern for a group like ours. So considering we are in the ports business, when we make strategic decisions on which port to go to, you would understand it is easier for us to approach business or set up business in countries which we are on friendly terms with, or we have these agreements with, right? So my point being that the strategic connectivity projects for a company, especially in the logistics department, also in the energy sector, because energy sector is again a lot of raw material that requires to come from all over the world, especially the renewables. So these become very key, and I'll take this opportunity to actually thank the Indian foreign policy makers, and the way India has shaped its foreign policy in the last decade. The concept of Vishwamitra, right, which I think is very apt, because in my opinion, the concept of minilateralism that came up, that if we share interests, we don't have to have the same ideology, we can just know that, okay, XYZ thing works for us, we'll work on that. Just because I play cricket with someone does not mean I go to work with the same guy. It's different. I have a different set of friendship here, I have a different kind of friendship there. And that is a game India, I won't call it a game, it's too demeaning. India has been very brilliant at using this minilateral kind of relations that it has made across topics which are very crucial. Energy security, food security, you say, anti-terrorism, you say, they have been brilliant with it. Right? So I say that Vishwamitra for India is very apt. But another point which I thought must have gone behind calling India Vishwamitra is the sage Vishwamitra was a king, an accomplished warrior, and then he turned to be a sage. So he had the pride of the king, which Indians definitely have, the vision of a king, the abilities of a warrior, and third, the wisdom and diplomacy and the selflessness of a sage. So I think India makes complete sense as Vishwamitra. And also, Vishwamitra never cowered down to superpowers. He would fight with gods if he thought that the gods were right and he's right, gods were wrong and he's right. Right? So I think that makes Vishwamitra. And I just end with a short story which I think everyone knows. Yeah, just one. A short story which everyone knows about the Mahabharata. So my name is Karn, so I had to bring up Mahabharata at some point of time. So there was this scene where Krishna is lying down, and I think Duryodhana and Arjun go to meet him to get him on their side for the war, just before the war. And he asks Arjun that, Arjun, what do you want? So Arjun says, I want you on my team. And he says, I'm not going to pick up any weapons. I'm not going to do that. You can either have my army, but I personally am not taking weapons. I think that's India, right? No military alliance in a way. But still, Arjuna knows he can never be on the winning side if Krishna is not with him. So in a way, I think India also holds the post of Krishna in the global geopolitics. You have to have it on your side. So now, taking a page from Anil sir in making acronyms in a way. So we have the role of Vishwamitra, the stature of Krishna, the policy of ahimsa and samvad, diplomacy and dialogue, which together I think put together makes Vikas. So I think I'll end my talk over here. I hope I made some good points for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You have lived up to your role in this, and the hyperport that they are currently managing in Israel. So the connectivity from our point of view at least exists very much. Now I'll request Ohad Kaynar to share his thoughts.
Ambassador. The young man that just spoke, Mr. Kedar, this was his first speaking engagement in front of an audience. It's a bit dreadful. He did an amazing job. I think we can give him another round of applause. I have a moment before I speak about IMEC where I'm going to address a few things that I was waiting patiently for 24 hours to address, so you'll have to bear with me. And I'm going to remind Ambassador Trigunayat, about a year back, we were sitting together at the forum discussing ITU2. And Ambassador to Morocco later on gave me some advice, which I hold dearly, but I'm going to disregard completely right now, because I'm going to do the same thing again. He said, don't be too sentimental. I try not to, but there are a few things that require some correction, and the responsibility on my shoulders as the only Israeli speaking here in an official capacity in the offline version is high. And so I will correct a few mistakes. I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. Notice that despite the fact that we are 0.2 of the world population, we took up most of the conversation except the session that was focusing around Ukraine and Russia. So you spoke about us 90% of the time. We can change the logo from Geopolitics to Middle East and Israel with an Indian accent and Arabic affairs. I think there are much more important things going on in the world right now. India's tension with China, Pakistan, Russia and Ukraine, the takeover of Taliban over Afghanistan, the war between Armenia and Azerbaijan, the horrible, horrible terror attacks in Africa, which were regarded yesterday actually, talking about the Sahel, and now in Russia, after yesterday. And there are amazing, amazing shifts within multilateral platforms and unilateral platforms, and I think they all deserve more attention than my country does here. And so it's very interesting, and I think it's a moment for introspection that you can all do and ask yourself, why are we so interesting to you, and how much information is out there and disinformation is out there about my country, and why do you latch onto it so hardly? To be an Israeli diplomat requires thick skin. As I said, I don't have that thick skin, and so I decided to actually address a few things and correct them. The numbers you were using in regards to casualties in Gaza, they are not correct. They're the numbers of Hamas. Okay, you're using 32 as if it's God-given. Does Hamas wear a uniform? Do you know how many of the people were civilians or fighters? You don't. Don't use that number. You're supporting the allegations of a terror organization. Wait until the war is over, then use the numbers that are the real numbers. You really don't know what they are right now. Second is, and here with all respect to you, Excellency, I remind you that Jordan also had its past with Palestinians in September 1970. When you have to do something for the protection of your people, you have to do it, and this is what we're doing. And so did Syria, and so did Egypt, and I didn't hear much of the world at that time, and I don't think there were mass protests in Europe at the time, and not in America. And it's interesting that after Assad butchered 500,000 of his people, we heard nothing and no protests, and when Israel goes to an operation, after the largest per capita terror attack ever, okay, in Indian size, this would be 200,000 people dead within a day. Have that in your brain. And so after that, we have huge, huge protests against Israel's retaliation. I'll say a word to the ambassador of Turkey. I love your country. I served in your country. I no way am bashing it, but I just want to answer your question that you posed. 3 ambassadors were ejected. That's the number that you're asking. 2 of them during recent years with AKP, and 1 during the 1980s after the coup, and then there was a constitution in 1982, and at that moment there was 1 else. In regards to request for a ceasefire, there was a ceasefire. 6th of October, there was a ceasefire. It was there. Hamas broke the ceasefire. If you're coming to us and demanding a ceasefire, you must remember that there are 0 Israelis, willingly in Gaza right now. Not the IDF soldiers want to be there, not the hostages want to be there. And there were 0 Israelis from 2006 until the morning of October 7. There's truly a Judenrein place on earth, it is Gaza. Okay? And if you want a ceasefire, the first thing you need to do is ask for the release of the 132 hostages, and you will have a ceasefire tomorrow. But that's not what most countries are focusing on, and they're applying pressure to Israel, which should be applied to Hamas. So I remind that as well, because we heard that as well. I want to say something that, again, slipped everybody's mind. Gaza has another border with Egypt, and that border right now is being reinforced with 3 layers of fences, not 1. And soldiers up to here. It can import and export whatever it wants through Egypt. It's another friendly Arabic country, but for some reason that border is closed as well. Then I refer you to a poll that was done by PSR. It's a Palestinian institute. The Palestinian pollster, Dr. Shkaki, on the 23rd of 3rd, has nothing to do with Israel. It shows that 70% of Palestinians want to have Hamas in power, both in the West Bank and in Gaza Strip. So wake up, please, and understand that if that's a fact, and also 80% by the same poll are supportive of the massacre of 7/10, then I don't understand who our partner for the two-state solution is. I hope that we have one. Okay, I know you're a peaceful man who promoted peace. I'm also a peaceful person, and I would love to have peace. And I think most Israelis would. The word apartheid came up, not in our context in South Africa, but then again in our context, so I'll say something about this. As my friend Ilan Neuer said, how many Jews are in Jordan today? How many in Egypt? How many in Syria? You know, this goes both ways. We actually have Arabs in my country, it's about 20% of our populace. Then a quote about Iran, Iraq. The ambassador said it was not here. I wanted to tell him on the spot. This is a far relative, a very distant relative of mine who passed away. It's Mr. Henry Kissinger. And what he said actually was, it's a shame that both sides could not lose in the Iran-Iraq war. That's the exact quote. And I think he was wrong. He was a brilliant man, but he was wrong on that. I think they did both lose. And I think they are still losing today. Last, and then I go to IMEC for a second. India very wisely adopted the policy of de-hyphenation. It's smart. You're friends with everybody. Or you can decide not to be friends with anybody. But what you have is interests and not sentiments in your foreign policy. I think this is exactly what foreign policy needs and how it works, and it makes sense. And when we talk about making sense, sticking to non-aligned movement patterns in multilateral platforms doesn't make sense for India. So if you're talking about the change of pattern, is it happening or not happening? It happens when it makes sense for India. And India has its interests, and we respect that as Israel, but we're happy to see that more countries are asking themselves, what are they drawing back from adhering to the same non-aligned movement lines of bashing Israel in every platform when Israel supplies them, and you said yourself, some of the speakers, with some of the armament they need to protect themselves. And this is just one thing that we offer. We also offer gas and water technologies and a lot of other things. The Abrahamic Accords were proof of late President and very brave President Anwar Sadat, and I know that some in the Arab world don't like him. But he said, Kul wacha l'chalo. And he was correct about that, because if Arafat can say that the Palestinians are the only ones to decide on their destiny, then each and every Arabic state can decide on their own destiny. And some of them have decided to make peace, and we're happy for that, and we relish that. And I think the same applies also to Saudi Arabia. And when a project takes form, such as IMEC, and I was just getting to it, so you have to suffer me a minute longer, okay, then it's the prerogative of Saudi Arabia if it wants to promote it, and not of Iran, and not of China, who are extremely fearful of this project taking place. I'll say a little bit about IMEC. IMEC comes from Ambassadors Ushpis and Ambassador Shringla, and their idea was called Railway for Peace, and it was under I2U2 platform, where people ask me if I2U2 is viable. It's very viable. It's just this one portion, which is the biggest portion of it, has been taken out and became the headstone for other platforms. It was meant to bring back the U.S. into an area where it was absent for many years during the Obama and Trump administrations, and the way was using interests which are both economical and political. And I have to use Dennis Ross's term here, which is it's doomed to succeed. The reason it's doomed to succeed is not because it's economically going to be a replacement for the Suez Canal. It's not. One ship, one container ship, does more than a train line can do in a long time. But the idea is diversification, and every other place on the planet is doing the same thing. Routes are being diversified. Supply chain is a very critical thing past COVID, and people understand that. And so I'm saying it's doomed to succeed. And when it happens, just like NEOM and just like LINE, and Saudi Arabia is very aggressive on its ambitions and how it's doing things, it will happen. It will also be a hub for innovation, which is much more important than that little railway which will go all the way into Haifa. And last, and I know I took a lot of time, but it was important for me to also express these things. We have history to show that these things work. And between Turkey and Israel, even at the height of conflict, during the Mavi Marmara conflict, we managed to create a line called the Iskandaron Haifa line, and some of you don't even know that it exists, but it works on the Tyr Convention, and it was helping Jordan, by the way, primarily to export its goods when it could not do so due to the Arab Spring and other factors efficiently through the Suez Canal. And so, or through Syria, which was an issue in those days, the civil war. So I'm saying there are examples of this. This can happen. It's a promoter of peace. It's a really important thing, and we are happy for it to becoming. I have much more to say, but I know we don't have time.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
My dear colleague Ambassador Trigunayat, distinguished participants. Today, in the jargon of international relations, connectivity is one of the most fashionable words. But what exactly is connectivity? Connectivity is about bringing countries, people, and societies closer together. It facilitates access and is a means to foster deeper economic and people-to-people contacts. Connectivity covers all modes of transport, institutions, infrastructure, IT, digital links, energy, research, cultural exchange, as well as customs and trade. Connectivity as a foreign policy tool means implementing strategic intent through investment in infrastructure. It needs strategic intent and political will. After these general remarks, let me now turn to another popular subject, which is part and parcel of connectivity, that is corridors. The subject matter is like a beauty contest. Every now and then there is a new one coming on stage. Some of the proposed projects are very ambitious and far from being realistic. In some cases, one overlaps with another one. Three of these connectivity projects, namely Belt and Road Initiative, India-Middle East Economic Corridor, and North-South Corridor, are listed on our agenda item today. But in fact, there are a lot more. To name a few, Turkey's Middle Corridor Initiative, Turkey, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan Transport Corridor, which is widely known as Lapis Lazuli, and the most recent one, Turkey-Iraq Development Road. One should also not forget mentioning the Trans-European North-South Motorway Project, TEM. It starts from Poland in the north and ends in Turkish-Syria border with a total of 24,000 kilometers of motorways at high standards. Among all these projects, TEM is the only one put in practice and almost successfully completed. The North-South Corridor, INSTC, envisages the transport of trade from China to Europe by using Trans-Siberian railways. The ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine and the embargoes imposed by the West upon Russia have adversely affected the development of North-South Corridor. The leading logistic companies like Maersk and Nurminen have already started to prefer the Middle Corridor, starting from the beginning of this year. The Chinese Road and Belt Initiative is the most ambitious project involving 70 countries, which has been launched by the Chinese President Xi Jinping as early as 2013. Most of the infrastructure investment costs are financed by China. The recent decline in the growth rate of China may also decrease the interest of developing countries in the Belt and Road Initiative. India Middle East Europe Corridor could be seen as a good alternative connectivity initiative to the BRI. But the unexpected Israeli-Palestinian war might also have adverse effects on this project. The implications of this war will certainly be long-term, which will erect unforeseen barriers in the implementation of the project. Security both in Europe and the Middle East is fractured, and it will take a long time to heal the wounds of these conflicts in the years to come. Iraq-Turkey Development Road is the most recent project on stage. It starts from Faw Harbor in Iraq and ends in Ovaköy, south of Turkey. It consists of 1,200 kilometers of total railway and roadway. The cost is estimated as $17 billion. The first phase of the project will start in 2025 and will be completed in 3 years. The present government of Iraq is keen and very much willing to materialize this project. But the main question is, everyone's mind is the instability in Iraq and the existence of so many terrorist organizations active in that region. Ambitious it may sound, but Turkey was the front runner in taking the crucial importance of connectivity in its broadest sense on board as early as beginning of 1990s, long before China. Suffice it to say that in October 1998, Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline project was initiated with the Ankara Declaration signed by Turkey, the US, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan. I'm happy to note that this pipeline was constructed by a consortium of Turkish and an Indian company. In the same year, the multilateral agreement was signed in Baku among 12 international transport corridor Europe, Caucasus, Asia members to revive the historic Great Silk Road to connect Europe to the South Caucasus and Central Asia. Coming to the nearest past, Turkey initiated a project in 2010 to enhance connectivity on a regional and international scale dubbed as the Middle Corridor, a term that is now in wide circulation, so this is not a new project. The Middle Corridor connects Turkey to Central Asian republics and to China via Caucasus, Caspian Sea, passing through Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan. It's an integral project intended to tie together seaports, airports, railroads, highways, energy lines, and digital networks. The Middle Corridor also entails the Northern Artery and Southern Main Artery, Turkey, Israel, Egypt connectivity. To strengthen connectivity in a large belt of geography that are mutually beneficial for European, Middle Eastern, and Asian stakeholders. Consequently, the Middle Corridor, as the backbone of connectivity in the east-west direction, is designed to also cover the northern and southern areas as its ancillaries, reinforcing it. The idea behind the Middle Corridor project has been to prepare conducive grounds for peace, stability, and welfare in a broad region and aligning the interests of regional as well as non-regional actors. The Middle Corridor is not made in China, but launched by Turkey, the South Caucasus, namely Azerbaijan and Georgia, coupled with Central Asian republics. In that respect, is a different version of Turkey's own Belt and Road Initiative. What China did in 2013 was to extend the scope and geographical dimension of Middle Corridor at a time when Western countries were enjoying a good time of slumber. Nevertheless, given the dire circumstances, now plugging in the European security owing to the Russian-Ukrainian war and the events that are still evolving in the Middle East, necessitate to prioritize Middle Corridor by all stakeholders. With the exception of IMEC and North Corridor, all these projects either pass through or somehow connected with Turkey. It is crystal clear that Turkey has a tough geography, but no one can deny that from the perspective of transport corridors, the geography provides Turkey with a lot of advantages. No wonder Napoleon said once that if there was a single capital for the whole world, it should have been Istanbul.
Raj Shukla. Delegates, friends, ladies and gentlemen. Yesterday during the panel on why Bharat matters, Ambassador Trigunayat made the point as to how the book by Dr. Jaishankar was in some ways a report card on the foreign policy of the Modi government. Well, Bharat also has a national security dimension, one that is equally critical. How does the report card look there? So I thought it wise today, of course, with the permission of Abhinav and the chair, to share some of those thoughts in my allotted time of 15 minutes with the gathering of scholars and practitioners here for deeper scrutiny and wider debate. Bharat, the national security dimension. Especially so since in my mind, the subject has not garnered enough attention either in the media or in the wider, more thoughtful strategic community. So here are the key postulates of my thesis. Actually, it's a recounting of India's national security story over the last decade. Yesterday Ambassador Puri was mentioning, Yuva Shakti, Nari Shakti. So this is about Seni Shakti. And this is what I have to say before you. They are my views, but do kindly listen. I believe that in the 10 years of its existence, the Modi government has laid a very strong foundation for India's national security makeover. in my view, the most ambitious, bold and far-reaching reforms in defense and national security since independence. So while a very strong edifice has been laid, given the enormity of the and the complexity of the challenges that line India's national security path, multiple transitions still need to be made to complete the national security makeover. But a transformational start has been made. Now, what is this enormity and complexity? I'll be the first to admit that the China challenge is huge. China, it's the PLA's transformation, its signature projects, the rocket force and the strategic support force, its transition to digital combat is something that we must look at far more seriously than we are doing today. And complexity, I'll quote General Mark Milley, the recently retired Chairman Joint Chiefs of Staff, Chairman Joint Chiefs of USA. He says the character of war in recent times has undergone the most profound changes in recorded history. So both the enormity and the complexity. And what is this change in recorded history? In terms of technology, talent and innovation, that's how national security is changing. So I'll just give you two very quick examples. Technology. So all militaries know how important the OODA loop is. You know, the observe, orient, direct and act. Now this OODA loop has been dramatically changed by artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence is all about pattern recognition. And if you have to run through the OODA loop fast, AI there is doing wonders. I'll just give you one example. So post 7th October, the Israelis and its proxies have fired about 150 times on American combat assets and bases in the Middle East. And in 149 of them, who has won that game? It's not the mighty America. It's the Israelis and the Houthis using low-cost AI. So this is the power of a symmetricity, and this is how the game in national security is changing. Talent. Today, the partner of Spacecom is not NASA. It is not Boeing Lockheed. It is Elon Musk. It is these guys who are changing it. Ukraine today is still in the fight because of innovation. Helsing and 250 odd companies, most of them from the Silicon Valley, have changed the nature of the Scotland and company battles in Ukraine. And Russia is, of course, winning because its military-industrial complex is better. Now, these are the changes that we have to bring in our national security framework: technology, talent, innovation. And in that sense, this transformational start that I'm talking about is extremely significant. So the grand strategic geometry of this makeover was laid out by the Prime Minister himself in a landmark address to the combined commanders in December 2015 about the INS Vikramaditya. It is on the net. It is virtually a grand strategy. For the younger scholars here, do go to this address and you will see. It was remarkable for its breadth of vision and clarity of purpose. It spoke about a number of things: the need for transformations in our beliefs and doctrines, attaining the right balance in our maritimity and connectivity, so revisiting our strategic outlook, looking at Indian traditions of statecraft de novo, technological revamp, structural corrections like the theatre commands, cultural transitions. He spoke of the need to pivot from mere platform acquisitions to talent acquisitions. And he said two very different things. For the first time he said, and I'm paraphrasing him roughly, he said, we've had a lot of leaders in the Indian Army, in the Indian Armed Forces, who've been valorous and brave. We now need thought leaders who can drive change through the national security system. The second thing he said, he spoke about calibrated capacities in power projection. No Prime Minister had done this before that. It's not, about a military which is going to jackboot around the world, but calibrated capacities, and I'm quoting him again, to protect Indian citizenry and interests across the world. Now, all this was from somebody who understood the military greatly, its deeper nuances, what ailed it, and what precisely we needed to do, and that's why it was remarkable. It was such a significant departure from some of the staid addresses we were used to. It was so ambitious that, given our experience with many stillborn ventures like the Naresh Chandra Committee, 5 years to recommend why we need the CDS and 5 years to stall it, classical lazy drift, that within the military, me personally, there were deep misgivings, even skepticism. There was an overwhelming sense which said, ye to ho hi nahi sakta. And while our soldierly combat instinct said that the Prime Minister was right, our experiential learning told us that this would not happen, because there were too many saboteurs still out there in the world. This time, however, the the reforms have unfolded. And please look at them, bit by bit, in precise tranches, but with unfailing regularity and dogged resolve. And I'm sanguine that they will only grow bigger and even faster in the times to come. The first in the series is, of course, the CDS-DME. Please study it carefully. It is more powerful in conception and sweep than the Barry Goldwater Nichols, which is really the gold standard globally in terms of military integration. And it corrected a major anomaly in the civil-military relations narrative because it restored to the services their legitimate voice in strategic military affairs, it exhorted them to think for themselves, and said that I have now empowered you, now you drive the change in the national security frame, of course under robust political control. And we are seeing how difficult that is with, over the theatre commands. But it was quite unprecedented if you are familiar with the reality and machinations of the past. We saw these new normals in our strategic outlook. Abandonment of a defensive crouch, Barakot, Kailash. Now, they were not perfect operations, but they demonstrated a political will and a considerable risk-taking ability. In swift strides, we signaled to our adversaries what would have taken months of tortuous diplomacy to accomplish. And the message was clear, that for adventurism, there will be cost to pay. And they are pretty significant in terms of operational deterrence and stability that has since manifested both along the line of control and the LAC. On the LAC today, there is parity, if not ascendancy. The operational rebalancing which took place, the decisive change in our force posture, which was very Pakistan-oriented and not China-oriented, reflecting the threat more accurately. And then the most, I think, significant reforms, root and branch, is what is known as Atmanirbharta in defense. We realized that capacity was the father of strategic intent, and it goes beyond the critical objective of self-reliance. And in hindsight, it was extremely far-sighted. Today you see that neglect of the American military-industrial complex and its atrophying statecraft has brought the Americans, this very formidable military, to this very sorry pass. Today in Ukraine, the Americans are trying to step up their capacities of something as simple as artillery ammunition. And they can make it or build it up to 1.5 million rounds per month only by 2025, America. And the Russians have already got a capacity of 5 million rounds per month. In Advika, while the Russians were firing 10,000 rounds, the Ukrainians could muster only 1,000, 10:1. In some other areas, it is 15:1. In the Taiwan contingency, the mighty Americans don't have 7 days of missiles and precision munitions for a fight. American studies admit that the Chinese military-industrial complex is 5 to 6 times more powerful and faster than the American complex. So, this opera of failing deterrence. Act 1 was Afghanistan, Act 2 was Ukraine, Act 3 was in the Middle East, and Act 4 would be in Taiwan, is all because of neglect of its military-industrial complex. And today, Americans are questioning why spend $950 billion, have 800 bases, 11 aircraft carriers, when you seem to be, your deterrence seems to be failing in every theater. Now look at these significance, the changes that were made in our Atmanirbharta in defense. For the first time, we've been talking of innovation, energy, and enterprise. I'm paraphrasing the Prime Minister when he says that the purpose of this Atmanirbharta in defense is to liberate the forces of innovation, energy, and enterprise from the scourge of process and procedure, Niyamo ka jal. And this business of Tata Airbus, which is challenging monopolies like HAL, innovation and process reform. And we are looking de novo at our own procurement models, discarding flopping models of the West. Now, all these are big changes that are occurring, and they're extremely significant, because if you prioritize process over outcome, you will get the result which, Zelensky voiced at the Munich Security Conference when tired of the slow motion response of the West. He said that enemy artillery does not go silent because of the complexity of your Byzantine procedures. Now, these are all the things, which Atmanirbharta in defense is about, and the fruits are already apparent. You have an Indian startup, Third iTech, who's got a deal in Predators with an American corporate major. 114 AI is doing maritime space awareness with another American corporate major. These things were unheard of in my times. It's absolutely significant reforms. And all this goes well. India, with the fullness of time, will emerge as a defense powerhouse. These startups will scale up. They will become national champions. And why should we not think in those terms? If the Chinese today, out of 22, defense majors in the world, 7 are Chinese, why can't 2 to 3 be Indians? So these are the changes, Atmanirbharta and defense, OFB reform. This whole business, OFB was this dumb munition behemoth. It is being challenged now to deliver on precision capacities. There are small companies like solar industries, led by a gentleman like Satyanarayan Nuwal from a very humble background, but a plucky defense entrepreneur. He set up the largest explosive factory in the world. He's exporting to USA, Israel, and Sweden. And the icing on the cake is DRDO reforms. I never thought in my lifetime, DRDO, which was this great scientific enterprise, very talented but not delivering on many issues. They've been put through this Defense Technology Council under the PM's direct superintendence. And you have members from the private sector and startups on the board. Absolutely unheard of. And somehow these changes have not got captured in the wider narrative. So I just thought there are a couple of other issues. Just as to think that I was told 15. Please, it is 15. Unless you want to show me off the stage. So lovely things are happening like civil-military fusion, defense coming out of the shadows of foreign policy. There's no time because we are in a hurry here, but extremely substantive reforms. At least the young scholars here, I would seriously urge you to study them in depth. And if you study them in depth, the critiques that emerge will make our national security system even more strong. One point I'd like to significantly highlight. Just notice how Delhi is emerging as the hub of global ideation in national security and foreign policy. Ambassador Puri yesterday made this point about words and narratives mattering. Raisina, it has become a fount of deep conversations in foreign policy. And now we have begun to shape conversations in national security. For the first time after years of resistance, the Indo-Pacific Army Chiefs Conference was held in Delhi, 33 chiefs around the world, UK, USA, Brazil, Tonga and Singapore, followed up by the Chanakya Defense Dialogue, which was addressed by the Honorable Vice President, the Global Technology Summit. And so we are shaping conversations in national security and foreign policy, never done before. So I think, all these things are extremely important. And in summation, I'll just say this, that we must acknowledge that we have successfully navigated range change in style and substance, Shaili or Sar. We have untied many Gordian knots. We must celebrate what we have achieved. And December 2015 is an extremely significant moment in our national security. A good analogy might be with the liberalization moment in the economy that took place in 1990. But we must, in all humility, realize that we do have to leverage these achievements to step up the game further in pace and scale, deepen the conversation, thoughtful ideation, concerted follow-up action, because as I told you, we still have the enormity of the China challenge and the complexity of the challenge of character of war. So, these needs to be done. There are so many subjects to be explored. I'll just give you 2 examples. One is of asymmetric addressal, like somebody was talking of defense budgeting. America's defense budget is 3 times that of China. China's defense budget is also roughly 3 times that of India. Why is it that Beijing is causing displacement anxiety in Washington and we don't cause similar displacement anxiety in Beijing? Because of all these secondary, tertiary reforms. It's just not about money alone. And yet, there's another point. China recently announced its defense budget. Its growth annually was 7.6%. It is far more than its economic growth, which is 3 to 4%. India, we are spending only about 2% on our defense, but our economy is growing at 7%. So are the Chinese reckless or is India wise? So there are so many issues in defense of deep complexity, which must be debated further in the context of what I said. And since we've been talking about our civilization text, let me just conclude with these very wise words of Acharya Chanakya. He said, "Ki agar shastra ko bhuloge, to apni sanskriti khologe." So it's extremely important that we tap the wisdoms of our cultural texts and see how we can strengthen our strategic culture, develop better traditions in statecraft. So, agar shastra ko bhuloge, to apni sanskriti khologe. But he also went on to say, कि अगर शस्त्र का त्याग करोगे, तो राष्ट्र लिखोगे. So we must nurse the instrument of force carefully and position it very thoughtfully in our strategic calculus. I think with those words, I will come to an end. Thank you.
Thank you, General Sir. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Now we have, since this was the biggest panel, I must say, we may have exceeded a few minutes, but it was worth it. We are left with 2-3 minutes now, so very quick 2 questions if there are any.
First of all, thank you to the panel for such a First of all, thank you to the panel for such an illuminating talk. It was very interesting to see different perspectives. My name is Raj Shukla. I'm a student from Pondicherry University. And my question is to Lieutenant General Raj Shukla. So I just wanted to know if you weigh in on non-traditional military threats that are emerging in today's time. For example, I'm specifically talking from the perspective of climate engineering. So like we have new technologies such as sun dimming technologies, cloud seeding, which can be again used to, curb monsoon carrying winds. So these kind of technologies also are creating a new era of, tensions or like new era of threats. So do you think this has been recognized in the current defense policies with whatever has been decided by the government?
About climate engineering, this issue I'm aware of has been investigated at some depth in the past. I'm not quite aware of the current position of it. But it's not only this issue. As I was trying to explain, you look at Ukraine, people call it the First World War with drones, which means there are two distinct dimensions. One is, of course, this traditional squadron company battles, the blood and the gore, all that has not changed. But the character of war, I was quoting Mark Milley, he's saying it's the most profound changes in recorded history. And look what AI is doing there, what drones are doing there. Look what, the power of asymmetricity, the magic of precision. I'll give you this asymmetricity. See, look what's happening to the Americans. So a drone costs $20,000. So the Iranians and their proxies fired 3 of them. So to intercept it, you fire a $2 million missile. And if it brings it down, out of the 3, you'll get down just 1. 2 get through, and if they get through, they will hit a ship costing $20 billion with 300 sailors. This is how the Iranians have opened up a factory in Tatarstan, in Russia, which are just doing low-cost drones. Look how data is being sold. Palantir CEO walked across to Zelensky and said, just give me your data. I'll give you all products and services free. So AI and associated technologies have been integrated across the grids of war, from fire, maneuver, logistics. AI is being used to do blood transfusion in trenches. So it's absolutely dramatic, the things that you are talking of, non-combat, non-traditional. And therefore, recruitment patterns are changing. The Ukrainians today, their battalions have 1 software engineers and 2 coders. Unheard of in our context. You don't think of software engineers in combat. AI in Pentagon is being driven by Craig Martin. Who's Craig Martin? He's neither a civil servant nor a soldier. He was doing machine learning for Lyft, a cab company. So I can give you hundreds of examples like this. AI and 250 companies from Silicon and the big tech world have made fortunes. There's a particular startup called Helsing in Ukraine. From a startup, it's become a unicorn. So all non-traditional combat. But what is also happening is that in these areas, they're being fused with actual combat. You look at Russian air power, for 2 years you would have seen, it was just not there anywhere on the horizons. It's taken them 2 years to convert all their dumb munitions with low-cost engineering of this kind to make them precise. And suddenly in Advika, air power is back. And it contributed greatly to the Russian victory. So there is a huge space for what is non-traditional, emerging, ISET kind of technologies. And that is what is so good about Atmanirbharta and defense, because it anticipated it. And a lot of that good stuff is happening. And today if you go to IIT Delhi, There are at least 20 startups, each startup with 60 IT engineers working late into the night. So a lot of these good things are happening. And I also make that point about talent. So now national security needs good young talent like you people. You must come in.
And you'll be hearing about it in the next session after this on digital.
For our Israeli diplomat. First of all, the sources of information about what's happening in Gaza is not only Hamas, but the spokesman of the Israeli military, who always brags about what he has done inside Gaza. And secondly, all United Nations organizations and all these international NGOs who testify to what is happening in Gaza. So if you want to belie the sources of the Minister of Health of the Palestinian Authority, fine. But how about the rest of the world? So please, clarify this point for you. The second one is, why did Israel change its contract with China in 2020 when they really wanted to sell them or allow them to manage the Haifa port, or manage it, and then you turn to India later on, to Adani, I think. So what was the reason for those? Thank you.
Misinformed on the second one. Period. Point blank. They want you're wrong about this. The Adani friend here can tell you. That's first. Second, on the number, we can talk about numbers in all directions. No, he can tell you later. It's from Adani. But I can tell you from the government of Israel, you're wrong about this. The second, in regards to numbers, everybody is utilizing the 32,000 number coming out from the Ministry of Health in Gaza, which is a Hamas. It's a Hamas government. They're utilizing the number of Hamas. And that's why UNRWA repeats it like a parrot, and that's why others repeat it like a parrot. Now you can wait until the end of the war, and you can see if those that were running around in civilian clothes, putting a Kalashnikov in their hands, shooting, putting a Kalashnikov down and running to the street, if they are fighters or non-fighters. But if you're taking the number of a terror organization, you're supporting the terror organization. Take numbers when they are real numbers. And this is a part and parcel of the disinformation, misinformation campaign going around. Now yes, we are 9.5 million Jews that are doing whatever they can to put the truth out. And yes, there are 300 million that would be very happy to put other things out there, but it's not truth. It's speculation, and it's wrong. And when Hamas starts acting like, and we don't have to agree, when it starts acting like a military and wears combat uniforms, you will know if they're soldiers. They have not done it yet.